Hi, everyone. My name is Amy Moore, and I'm with Trace, and I am so excited to get started with today's session, the ABCs of Finance, how to get your finance house in order at series A, B, C, and beyond. Today's session will be 60 minutes, starting with a presentation by Mike Gonzalez, the CEO and co-founder of Trace, followed by a chat with Amy Cooks, the CFO of Clio. And then we will be saving 5 to 10 minutes at the end for audience questions. So if you have any questions at all during any point of this session, please enter it in the Q&A panel and we will get to those at the end. And then finally, today's whole session will be recorded and we will send out the recording to everyone afterward. And with that, I would love to hand it over to Mike.
Oops. Thank you, Amy. I want to get started off by just thank yous all around. So thank you, Amy Moore, for setting this up and just bringing everything together for us. Thank you, Amy Cooks, for joining us as our guest today. And thank you all, those who registered. We're super excited to bring a ton of great content. It's one of the things that we're super proud of at Trace is to just deliver great materials and resources to the finance community. So this is the first of many great webinars that we'll be hosting. So today we're going to be talking about the ABCs of Finance Ops, how to get your finance house in order at series ABC and beyond. So let's dive right in. Want to get started with a question for everybody. Why did you join a startup? I was faced with the same choice, the same question, and I made the jump because I wanted to build. I wanted that fresh powder to leave my mark, to lead, to grow, and to learn. And I had that chance at Zenefits. Zenefits at one point was one of the fastest growing startups. And in 18 months, I went from being kind of like an IC entry level to being in the boardroom at a $4 billion company with people like Peter Thiel and Antonio Gracias. And it was an incredible learning experience. But not everything went as planned. And I think what I learned was just how hard it was to build, this finance department that I envisioned, that I dreamed about. And I learned that there was just nothing was perfect. And I worked day and night and weekends to get, everything into this kind of dream state. And really what I realized and what I've spent in the past 5 years just like racking my brain on is, how do we elevate the finance function and how do we solve these problems? And I think there's a couple challenges, and I think really the deck is stacked against finance in a few ways. First, I think finance just has this perception of being a gatekeeper. And I think it's like, seen as the team that says no and, a value preservation function rather than a value creation function. And next, I think I could have put, Zoom here for everybody that's been remote for over the past year and just how hard it is to collaborate and share information and get information. But I think there's also this trend in productivity tools merging with collaboration and just new expectations for how we communicate with people in the business. And I say productivity tools merging with collaboration, and they really did actually merge with Salesforce and Slack. And then finally, just the tech stack and the tools that we have been built for back office. I spent the earlier part of my career is building FP&A systems, planning models, and about 1 in 10 projects we're actually able to get business partners and collaborators into those systems. And then we think about tools like the ERP, really built for back office, built for accountants, not built for business partners. And at the end of the day, for finance to be successful, it requires collaboration and the people in the teams that are actually making the day-to-day decisions that drive the bulk of our financial results. And so, we believe that we need to transition finance from being scorekeepers to being a coach. And when I take a look at, coaches, the 3 best coaches from the past couple decades, they all have something in common, and they're relentlessly focused on process and teamwork. Coach K, Coach Belichick, and Coach Pop all have this just relentless passion for bringing people together and just focusing on the day-to-day grind, not strategy, not elite players, prospects. Everything is all about that day-to-day activity and bringing that team together. And so what does that look like what does that day-to-day execution, what does that process look like for finance? That's what we're here to discuss, and we're going to talk about how finance operations, why it's critical at every stage, and how we can think about building out our operations. What are some of the breaking points and some of the signs that we should look for, and how can we really deliver a world-class finance function? So operations really starts with the how. It's our processes, our tools, and our infrastructure. How do we set top-down targets? How do we facilitate purchasing processes and make sure that we're collaborating with our stakeholders in IT, security, legal, everybody who needs to be involved? How do we manage hiring requests and headcount plans and coordinate between hiring managers, recruiting, talent, and HR? How do we analyze all of our business data? How do we serve up analysis about how we're performing to our business partners in a timely manner when they need it? And that timeliness brings us to kind of the next critical aspect of this is just the when. What's our annual, quarterly, and monthly cycle? What's the drumbeat for how we really execute? And the finance calendar is something that we've written a lot about. We'll share that with you all. But really, there's one critical aspect of all of this that allows finance to deliver on its core value props. Whether it's efficiency or consistency or accuracy, whatever those value props are, the one thing that is mission critical to that is the people that we work with. It's our business partners. They're the ones that allow us to deliver on those key value props. They give us the information that we need, and they help us, and we help them make the decisions that are needed to execute. And so when we think about how that all relates back, the how is really, how we communicate and collaborate, the processes, the tools, the infrastructure. It's how we work with our business partner. The when is the cadence and the promise and the expectations that we set, with those people. And so what we're going to do now is dive into, 3 different stages of when you're getting started, the growth stage, and then the scale stage, and talk about, the different types of, services that finance needs to offer. And that's a very key element to all of this and the way that we like to think about things. And I've talked with hundreds of finance leaders, and, what we always kind of go back to is, finance is a service function, and our business partners are our customers. And so finance provides service to the businesses, and then we have to manage those services. It's like a portfolio of services, and those services will evolve and they'll change, but that responsibility remains permanent. As I chat with folks about this, one of the things that I challenge people on is to think about the finance function and this portfolio of services like you would any other department. When you think about a function such as account management and you think about, AM productivity, you would say, okay, my account manager does a quarterly business review. They do a monthly check-in. They need time to do updates and communication and send gifts. They need time for CRM updates. And then you can say, well, this AM can service 40 customers in this segment. And that same type of analysis needs to go on, and that same type of framework needs to be thought of for finance to really think about your customers and the portfolio of services that you provide. Document those services. Think about what we're offering to our business partners, how we offer it, how we communicate, how we set expectations. And the folks that I've done this exercise with, I think it's always shocking when you go back and do that audit, and it's like, our portfolio of services is not so great. We're not able to deliver on these things, and it's because we spend, 20% of our time reconciling headcount, and we spend, a big chunk of time managing ad hoc requests, trying to pull data, trying to do analysis, and it's all very reactive. And so that audit really will help you think about, where do I want to spend my time? What services do I want to offer? So now we're going to dig into the different stages, and we'll start at the startup stage. So somewhere around the Series A, B, you're going to be somewhere around 30 to 100 employees. Finance team is going to be 1 to 3, and a mix of kind of FP&A and headcount. Likely the first person is joining just to build everything out. And so at this stage, it's cleanup, right? It's making sure that we're going from an outside accountant, we're bringing in NetSuite, we're starting to clean up the books and make sure that we're audit ready. And then from a strategic finance perspective, we're thinking about planning the business and just really needing to inform investments. And so we're trying to build the model, we're trying to understand the levers, and then we're trying to help people as they're executing, just make right decisions. And I think at this stage, it's easy to hide behind the model. And so I encourage people to really think about their operations, even at the earliest stages. And from an operating perspective, you need to just stay aligned on hiring. And so at the earlier stages, headcount is going to be 60 to 70% of your operating expenses. It's really going to drive everything that you do. And that's actually going to be true, through growth stage and scale. It's just the nature of the businesses that we work in. And then you need to help people just get what they need to execute. And I think at these early stages, it's really easy to just stay focused on the model and just to keep things running on email and Slack and keep everything very ad hoc. And that leaves us in a bad state. And I think what we've found and what people who have done this a few times always learn is, you end up like, so this is my dog at home. His name is Luke. He's a really good dog, but he has a couple bad habits that he learned early on. And one of them is just grabbing and taking people's shoes. Fortunately, he doesn't chew the shoes, so it's actually a little bit endearing that he just likes to kind of hang on to a shoe or something like that. But it's a habit that has been really tough to break, And I think similarly, when you think about some of these organizational processes, when you let things go, it becomes a lot harder to change over time. And related to that, kind of idea of change management and instilling best practices early on, if you're in San Francisco, you're probably familiar with this building. It's the Millennium Tower. It's a beautiful building, and it was built on a shaky foundation. And so people who invested tons in beautiful condos saw the value of their condos fall in half. And now they're trying to figure out, how do we actually go back and build good foundations and good infrastructure? And the cleanup is just a nightmare. It feels mission impossible. And so a lot of people like to think about the shiny building, the model, of the outputs, the strategy, but really you need that foundation. How am I going to understand what my business partners want to purchase? How do I manage headcount and hiring, and really understand and just think about the collaboration of information and data and the workflows associated with execution before you really start thinking about building that skyscraper. And interestingly, Javier Soltero, he's the GM of Google Suite and responsible for Sheets, was recently on CNBC with Google Workplace's recent announcement. And he said a quote that just resonated so much, which is that typically people build documents about a plan. And this is a financial model, whether it's in a system like Anaplan Adaptive or Planful, or whether it's Excel or Sheets. And this plan represents ideas of what people want to do. But when it comes time to get to the actual execution of that plan, the document tends to just be a marker of reference. And I think that philosophy is, really focusing on execution of plans is such a core focus, especially as you start thinking about the next stages, which is the growth stage. So now we're talking about Series C, Series D stage businesses, 100 to 500 employees, a growing finance team somewhere in 4 to 10. But really now, we're going to have some serious board of directors, likely people that have taken companies public before with just higher expectations and higher demands. We're going to start hiring legit executives who have done this before. And a lot of times, I'm hearing from folks all the time, we just hired a new CMO, and the expectations of that CMO for what they get from finance is just night and day. And so people who don't anticipate that and aren't thinking about that portfolio of services in advance aren't ready to deliver, and I think nobody wants to be in a position where you hire a new kind of world-class, operating executive and you're not ready to deliver to them. So as we think about this kind of growth stage, the objectives are really business partner collaboration. How do we actually deliver the services that we need to our budget owners? And then thinking about how do we get more accuracy, insights, and control. So controls as we start thinking about, compliance programs and audits and SOX as we think about kind of IPO readiness and accuracy, because now the expectations is we're hitting our numbers, and we set these expectations with our investors, and we know that we're going to be eventually looking towards getting on that track. We're actually held accountable by the market to hit those numbers. One of the things that we did at Zenefits was we were trying to act every single quarter like, let's go through the process like we're providing guidance. Let's hold ourselves accountable to that guidance. Let's actually go through fake earnings calls and pretend like we're actually presenting our financials and thinking about our plans and holding ourselves to that level of accountability. And this is really the stage to start to do that. And so from an operating perspective, we want to start setting targets and working with the board, doing top-down plans, running scenarios, giving business partners, holding them accountable while also empowering them, and then helping facilitate planning and managing all the different requests, and then tracking that spending. And increasingly, spend tracking, it needs to be more real time. People can't wait until after the end of the month to get information. So as we're collecting these requests, how are we actually able to give a budget owner visibility into how any request that they're approving is impacting the financial performance of their function at that point in time? And that's really where execution and delivering insights at the right time really, really matters. And so some breaking points that you can look at here is if you're at this stage and you're still running on forms and spreadsheets. At this point, you're probably just in a reconciliation nightmare, and you just have no association of data between your systems, and everything probably feels very manual. And really once you get to this stage and things are still not really working well, it becomes an organizational problem. I think your teams become bummed when they do that time audit and they're spending all their time reconciling information, copying and pasting data, and so you're going to be running into operational challenges, but then also organizational challenges. A lot of times we hear, from employees that it just feels like a maze. Where do I go to get things done? I got to submit my budget request here. I need to do a vendor review here. I need to submit my purchase order here. It's a maze. And if it feels like a maze to you, then that's definitely a nightmare, and it's slowing down everybody across the business. And then finally, are you reacting to requests? Are things coming in and you need to go try to figure out where data's at, or you don't have data readily available? Marketing, for example, how are we tracking towards this project? Well, I'm actually going to have to go dig through a bunch of data, dig through some documents and try to get to this answer. And it'll take me a couple days. And that's not a great place to be. And then finally, you might just not have trust and confidence in your numbers. And that's the scariest place to be in that boardroom and to be thinking about, I'm presenting this information, is it complete? Or having to present a variance or an unknown transaction that happened from the last quarter. That's a bit of a surprise. Nobody likes to be in that spot. Very scary spot to be, likely keeping us up at night. And I've been there. So as we start to get to scale, now we're Series D plus, 500 employees, really, really growing the finance organization. Now we're thinking about driving efficiency and scalability and just getting IPO ready. And so now things like G&A as a % of revenue become really important as we think about just having good efficiency across G&A. When I was at Facebook, one of the things that we aspired to do and we were able to do was keep the finance function flat while doubling headcount across the rest of the business. And that was just through heavy investments in technology and process improvement. And of course, just making sure we're IPO ready. And so here, ideally, we have good infrastructure in place, good operations in place. And so then really it's just thinking about scale to more requesters, hiring managers and budget owners and different stakeholders in IT security, talent, HR, et cetera. And so, we've met some CFOs who have been in the position that, they've at the very earliest stages, Series B stage company invested in solutions like Coupa because change management and kind of bringing in a system that can scale was important because they've been there, done that, and know how challenging it can be to get to those levels of scale. Now, I definitely wouldn't recommend that, and I'm not sure he would do that over again, but I think it just speaks to people who have, seen the problem in scale. And so, one of the things that, we like to think about is make sure that the system that you select early on, is flexible and it's easy to get started. Should be as quick as getting started with Google Form, but also it has the infrastructure and the thoughtfulness of the system to get you to IPO and beyond and scale with you to many thousands of employees. And there's definitely platforms, modern platforms that can deliver on that promise. So at the scale stage, you are started off early, and this is Arnold Schwarzenegger in the early days. And Arnold didn't get to looking like this without years and decades of hard work and commitment to the basics, going to the gym every single day, 2 to 3 hours or more, and just putting in the work. And then over time, you morph into just this kind of elite figure that we see here on the right. The elephant in the room is well, didn't Arnold, use performance enhancing drugs? And I'm not going to speculate on that, but there actually is, special enhancements and a performance enhancing drug for finance teams. And that is focusing on your business partners and getting that information from your business partners and collaborating with them, getting the information out of their heads as early as possible, making sure that there's just strong synergy and that empowerment and just common belief and shared expectations. And the vision we want to paint for the world is what if everybody at your company shared that same sense of financial ownership that your finance team does? What if they have that same passion for finance and delivering on the expectations and the values of a high operating, performing business? And at the end of the day, we know that for most of the businesses that we're speaking with today, every employee has skin in the game, or most employees have skin in the game. And when things work, it impacts everyone. And when things don't work, it also impacts everyone. And so bringing people together, empowering them, and giving them paths to execute with good insights, good information, and strong collaboration is what we want to deliver and what we should all aspire to. So with that, I am super pumped to kick off a Q&A and a bit of a fireside chat with a friend and mentor and advisor, Amy Cooks, the CFO at Clio. Amy has done this multiple times at Udemy and Cloudera. She has an incredible passion for this and has just been around the block and really knows what to do. So excited to kind of get her feedback and to continue the chat. So welcome, Amy.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Awesome. Let's get started with you've had, an incredible run, and some of the investors that we both know says, Amy really knows how to pick them. And so like I said, you've done this a few times. What is it about, building at the earlier stages that gets you so excited, and what's that like for you? Why do you do it?
So one, I joined companies that I'm absolutely passionate about. Every company I've been at has solved a problem. And with that is kind of the cornerstone of who I am, where I want to solve the problem with the people I'm with. And so building that foundation, as you mentioned earlier, is I love the companies I've been at, and then having this solid foundation where it can be a 10-story building or a 100-story building, but being able to work with the people to build it and to have that solid foundation is key.
Awesome. Awesome. I'm sure when you join these places, it can be like a bit of a mess sometimes. So paint me a picture of, what you walked into at, say, Udemy.
So every one of these companies is a mess. I mean, you mentioned, earlier stage, there's almost no investment in the finance team. It's always a second thought. Udemy was later stage when I joined, and it was still a second thought. And so a big part of it is, as you're saying, it's a smaller team. Everyone's just kind of working towards getting the numbers out, doing as much as possible with little resources, nobody talking. And so one of the first things I did is to really reach out. What do people need? How do I service them, as you mentioned earlier? And it's exactly that. It's rather than having our heads down, one of the first thing I did is reach out to my team and said, go out and talk to people, figure out what they want and how do we match it? And then it's building the systems, which people first at the earlier stage, people first, then systems.
That makes perfect sense. I used to always tell my teams that, one of the greatest kind of signals of success is when their business partners invited them to their weekly meetings with their leadership team. If you're starting to get invited to those meetings, it means you're definitely doing something right, and there's good kind of collaboration there.
It's so funny. I make my teams go and sit in other team spots, because one of the first things is, finance and accountants are introverts. I'm a total introvert, but like by sitting with the other teams, they at least know the name, they start getting comfortable. And then once you have that, people will start coming to us and be less afraid of asking. Because especially if you look at finance has the reputation of saying no. So now that you sit with them, you've changed that attitude to where they now know you, they know your name, they can ask the questions. Often people are fearful of asking questions because they don't want to come off as dumb. But it's like, now that you've sat with me, you get to know my personality, you get to know my quirks. It's a lot easier.
That all makes perfect sense. Yeah. And resetting some of those bad habits becomes, easier when you're with them day to day. Talking about bad habits, like what are some of the bad habits that you faced, particularly at some of these early stage companies?
The most common, I believe, is buy now, ask later. We see that with so many different departments. Company credit cards has always been an easy way for early stage companies to run as fast as possible, but it creates the worst habits where people are going out, just buying whatever. Next thing you know is you have procurement, IT, finance sitting together saying, oh my God, we have 3 photo stock companies, or we have 5, e-signature vendors. How do we manage all of this? And so it's like correcting the behavior of saying, hey, how do I ask first? Or do we have this? And how do I spend right? And the other side of it is getting people to understand that there are budgets out there. Right? We're not this free for all. And it's the worst right after fundraising, where people are like, okay, we have money in the bank, we're going to start running. So how do we stop that, but at the same time, don't stop growth?
That makes perfect sense. Why do you think process and kind of like, it's such a dirty word at early stage companies?
I think process sometimes scares people in thinking that it's going to be more corporate, right? If there's process, then how do we grow fast? How do we do what we need to do if we have to follow rules? And so training people that process is just an enhancement, right? So if we have process, all of a sudden we have more, or I always tell people, if you tell me what you're spending on, then we can save money elsewhere. So if I take this e-signature example, is we spent 4 times the amount that we should because we have 5 different systems. So now if we had just that one system, we could hire another person. So really training them, that process enhances them.
Absolutely. And I think it can be easy for some, if say they were working for, a CEO like Mike Gonzalez who gets this stuff, and I understand that when you don't have good processes, what ends up happening is, that employee needs to go to finance, and they need to go to security to do vendor, they need to go to legal to get a contract. And that actually creates a ton of inefficiency and drag across the organization. So some CEOs are scared of process, but really they should be enabling it and empowering it, and because it'll actually drive efficiency, make people's lives a lot better. So if you're dealing in a situation with a CEO who isn't as receptive to kind of like, back office processes, how do you kind of navigate some of that?
I think key is communication. I mean, I've worked under CEOs that are exactly that, where they're just like, stop being the no person all the time, enable them. But it's this conversation and open communication of, I am enabling them, but I'm also enabling us. And so getting everyone on the us mentality. How do we share the right type of information at what time? And that really works with, budgeting. It's funny enough, I'm working on my reforecast right now, is going to every team and saying, what are your asks? And then having the next open conversation is, I know you have lots of asks, but be aware you may not get everything. So it's really like, we will do our best, but let me know what your priorities are, because this is the other challenge with process and all that. No one wants to really ask because they're afraid of the no. And because of that, no one learns how to prioritize. And I think once you figure out the communication side of it, you can really help them prioritize. And long run, it helps the businesses grow faster. I mean, 2 of my past companies, the growth was exceptional. It was over 3x year over year. And to do that, you have to have at least the basics of the foundation for communication, for process, and then everything else falls in place.
That makes sense. So, it seems very clear around, investing in this infrastructure for better data, efficiency. Of course, it gives finance all the levers that it needs to deliver on its value props. Why do you think so many finance leaders kind of put it off then?
That's a great question. I think it all depends on the type of finance people that are brought in at what stage. I think it is also having this big our internal tug of war is, how do we help people, but at the same time make sure that we are doing our jobs and having the right kind of controls in place. It is also, you were talking about servicing. We service multiple people. We service internally and externally. So this balance of, who do we prioritize? Is it the boards? Is it our investors? Or is it internal? Is it our customers? And so as a finance leader, we see all these different components. And so how do we put them all together? And how do we know that by servicing internal, it will have the impact we need to service the external components?
That all makes perfect sense. And so much of that, kind of ends up in, the model, and whether it's delivery to the board or delivery to the leadership team or your business partners, so much of everything resolves around the plan and of course actuals and comparing to plan. But when you think about that, what matters more, getting the models right or getting the process and kind of that infrastructure right? And how do you think that needs to evolve over time? You're setting a plan right now, like what happens like after that? Kind of going back to that Javier quote about plans and execution. What's your thought on that?
Yeah, it's a hard one. I feel like we build these models, especially early on, we build models without much information.
Right.
And then over time, we're Series C and now I'm doing a reforecast. When I was earlier on in my career, we set one plan in the beginning of the year and said, we're going to stick by it. And so then process got to be more of a priority. But then when we missed on plans, it was because we didn't have a process. And so it really is like, how do you do both at the same time? I came in and the budget for the year was already set, which is one of the reasons why I'm doing the reforecast. It's let's start with the process. What's the best way to build the process so we can build the plan around it? And what it also helps with is once you have the process, your plans become more, what's the word I'm looking for? More fluid. you know that they can change. Where, I mean, you guys hit it too. We're setting a plan in the beginning of the year, halfway through, you could be way over, way under. I mean, it's very rare that we hit it right on. And so without the process in place, we're going back to square one of building the model all over again.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's amazing. And one of the things I like to say is like, you spend all this time creating a model, and as soon as you say it's done, it just kind of sits there and collects dust, and you already know it's stale, because a week later it's like, well, I actually want to hire a contractor instead of full-time, and I want to double down on this project and punt on this project. So as you think about those kind of movements and changes, how do you think about, collecting that information and giving back and really empowering budget owners, where it's like, we know our targets, we're setting a forecast, how do we manage to those targets, as we operate and execute?
Yeah, headcount is actually the biggest one that's so hard to manage. I mean, A, B, C, D, especially working in tech, 70 to 80% of our spend is headcount.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the best ways I've done it is to stop being the gatekeeper for the number of heads. So putting a plan out there saying, here's your pot of gold.
Yep.
And letting them figure out how they're going to extract that and then put the right heads in place. There's some components of that that's hard. Again, if you want to talk about communication, where I love that, we have now an HR person or the facilities person that sits there and says, do we have the right room for it? So being able to have a spot to collaborate and say, here's your pot of gold. Every team then says, I think this is the number of heads I need. Then that trickles down to all the other functions that need that number. So.
Absolutely. It makes perfect sense. What about headcount in particular is so challenging, and for you and your teams, I mean, there's like reconciliations and so many changes, but what makes headcount so notoriously difficult that it doesn't seem like it's a problem that's really been solved?
It hasn't been solved. I think the big part of it is it changes all the time. Like I think about it, I hired a BI lead. And one of the first things after a month of being with me, he's like, oh, I need a data engineer, right? But in my plan, I just have him.
Mm-hmm.
In 6 months, I have maybe an analyst. But that's part of a moving tech company and fast growth is you bring in the right people and they bring in more knowledge or more information that we were blind to. And then even worse is if you think about the functions of it. So there's one of hiring the people that then decide that they need to have other functions, but then it goes to HR, and HR needs to know if there's a budget for it or not. So then they go to finance, and then finance says yes or no. And then the department goes, well, but we need it. And so then you have like all these moving people, and getting them all in a room, especially now, is impossible. And then even that is, they raise a hand and they said, yes, this is my want. And then all of a sudden, a month later, again, I just hit this, a month later, I have to ask again. Thank God I get to ask myself. But, but in this case, it is that. And then putting out the role. And like, so this data engineer is a great example is I have to reach out to my engineering team because the data engineer lives under engineering. So it's again, collaboration, communication, having a system where we can kind of share that information would be key. And we don't. And then again, we're also using different systems. We're using, Lever to job posts, and then we rely on people to communicate, and then we hope that everyone matches up well. So it's difficult.
It's definitely a nightmare problem, a problem that we've been studying a lot. So that's all fantastic. And what's interesting is, when we think about the portfolio of services that finance needs to offer, a lot of times I find, CFOs hyper-focusing on things like AP automation, but really some of these like strategic problems around headcount, it's like, well, I have my FP&A folks in here. FP&A is very expensive, typically the most expensive people in a finance function. I'm dealing with my budget owners, I'm dealing with their hiring managers, and these meetings and like all this chat, it's like actually a very, very expensive problem compared to like the transactional AP where people are like, oh, I'm investing in AP automation. It's like, well, you have this like monster of a problem, So how do you think about that as you navigate kind of like where your team puts energy and effort, and how do you think about like those types of analyses?
It's funny. I mean, I think about systems and how we look at it, and I think the AP systems win because it's a low-hanging fruit.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Our larger one is getting a great accounting system or finance system. I don't know how many CFOs that are still doing everything on Excel.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm to blame too. At Cloudflare, we were in the hundreds of millions doing everything on Excel. Udemy, same thing. And it's hard to find a system where you can put all the information in there from other systems, right? If we think about it, like headcount, I have, the payroll system, I need to download the current employees, and I have to go into Lever and see what open recs are out there. Then I have to go to each department and pull that in. And so it's so complex that sometimes we're just like, what's the easiest system we can just kind of throw out there to make sure that it's all in one place? But then even then I run into my own problem where then I have it in Excel and then everyone's on Google Sheets. So there isn't a great system when there is. But that's the whole thing. It is like a headcount is a huge expense and it's a huge headache. And I mean, I have finance people in past companies where that's all they're responsible for is just managing the headcount and making sure that we're predicting the future spend and the future needs correctly. And then once it goes to international, it's a bigger monster because then you're dealing with the multiple currencies and you're dealing with the different rules and how long it takes to onboard someone.
That's a really good point. I think the complexity increases with scale. And so, one of the points we tried to make earlier, just to kind of reemphasize, is you solve these problems early on. And yeah, you're going to need to adapt and things are going to be able to change. But, it's like solving them later on becomes a lot more difficult. Interestingly, one of the comments that we had in our chat is, somebody who recommended to the audience. So it's like, tackle really hard problems and that translates to faster career growth opportunities. And they say this in entrepreneurship as well, or even as just like a CEO, when a problem feels really hard, run towards it. Don't run away from it. And I think that we kind of see, that in areas of finance where it's like, we kind of shy away from these cross-functional, hardcore, multiple different system type problems. And that is probably the opposite of what we should be doing.
It's so funny. I say that about my career. I'm fear driven, right? Everything I'm afraid of, I go after just because if I'm not afraid of it, then it doesn't need to be solved.
Yeah.
Right? There's a reason I'm afraid of it. And so, yeah, I absolutely agree with that. But in business, I think everyone loves a low-hanging fruit because it's externally, they look like they've nailed it. And as we know, we work in startups. These are our short-term jobs. We stay in these for 3 to, at most 6 years. And so it's like, we want to, have the biggest impact, the external validation, but the biggest impact are these huge problems of building these foundations. And like, I'm super proud that I was able to build this foundation at Cloudflare where they were able to IPO. I love that, getting the kind of confirmation that foundation was so solid. And I see that over and over. It's one of the reasons I joined Clio. It's like, it's earlier stage for me, but I know my impact can be so great because if I solve these problems now, it's going to just continue on through the years. And then I've joined a company that I absolutely love the value. So the mission gets to be in place correctly for future generations.
Oh, absolutely. That's so very, very well said. I think, the idea of embracing your fear and running towards your fear is probably why we get along so well. So yeah, you're a few months into Clio, kind of, what are you doing differently there and kind of what's your strategy? So, similar to folks who might be in the first few months or thinking about kind of that next move or building something early on, kind of what are you thinking about as kind of your playbook and your strategy?
So, I was hired on to help raise Series C. So that's done, which feels great. But with that, it opens up so many doors and windows and to all of our challenges. And it really is, it's data sharing. Finance, accounting is one aspect of it, but I have a BI person as well, but it's how do we share the data? How do we get the data correct that we can share? How do we get people to communicate? Like this COVID, starting a job during COVID and being fully remote, communication so much harder. Everything's getting lost in tone or in our systems of communication. So how do I do that? Today I had a meeting where we showed our variance reports, right? And I have to go back saying, what questions do you have that you haven't asked? Where normally you can see someone's face and see what's missing. And then, at the same time, I'm like, oh, and I'm reforecasting. So reach out to me, tell me what you want. And this was even one of the worst answers is, what's the way that I let you know? It's like, do I just email you? So I'm going to have loads of emails of all these different requests. Mm-hmm. Now I have to then consolidate, which, you were talking about how much time do I have to actually work? This is where I have to find all this and, find the time where I can pull it all together to reforecast and communicate, and then it's communicated back, or the work in progress, which is the hardest. It's one thing that I pull it together. It's another thing that I get the board approval, but there's that in-between stage of, this is what I've built with your input. Does it look right to you? Is it good enough? And that this good enough sadly is our answer.
That sounds like the right foundations. So we're going to jump to Q&A real quick, but one last kind of quick question. What's your, as a multi-time CFO, what's your one piece of advice to the younger folks out there who aspire to be a CFO?
For me personally, it's been joining companies I'm absolutely passionate about and with people that I love working with. Mm-hmm. I think once you have that, the actual work just kind of falls in place. And then I guess the other part is, like, don't be afraid of challenges and your fear and all that. We keep on falling into this idea of just doing what's easy, and it's not how we're going to make changes. And so just go after challenges and have fun and be around the right people doing it and solve a problem. Like every single company I've been at solved a necessary problem or is solving.
That's amazing. So well said. Awesome. And so now let's take some audience Q&A. Let's see what questions we have.
Hey guys, that was awesome. Thank you so much. So there's a few questions here from the audience. This one is for Mike. What are the advantages of implementing purchase operations in the early days versus waiting? So like it says early days Series A versus waiting until Series C. What are the costs of waiting?
That's a great question. I think it kind of goes back to our slide of the Millennium Tower and SF, where you're building on quicksand. And I think Amy Cooks just mentioned it, where you need to collect this information, right? And you need to help people to buy things that they need. So you can do it with email and Slack, or you can hack together a Google form. But if you invest in the right system, it can get you live just as fast as using a Google form and give you that right infrastructure to collect that information. And I think, what we're seeing is there needs to be a transition of not just collecting information to check the box on approvals, but how do we maximize the use of that information? If we know what somebody's gonna buy, how do we translate that into a forecast? If we're setting top-down targets, how do we, understand how those purchases are going to impact our top-down targets and give that insights and information to our business partners in real time. And when you think about the value props associated to that, if you can get in early, or you can get it started early and get that value from that process, it makes it almost, a no-brainer to get started early, especially if you can scale that system through the later stages of growth and IPO and beyond.
Can I add one thing to that?
Yes, please.
Untraining bad behavior is a lot easier. So that's, I talked earlier about the whole credit card and people, purchasing and then apologizing later, but you stop that bad behavior. And when you do that with a small number of people versus larger, the impact is a lot quicker.
Absolutely.
Okay, this one is for Amy. We have a few in a row for you, Amy. What is your current tech stack and what's your future tech stack going to look like?
Yeah, so our current tech stack is minimal. Just joined, we're still on QuickBooks. We use a PEO for payroll, and then we have a few internal built systems. So with that, it's people. So future, I'm still building out what our future state is. Like I do think QuickBooks as an accounting system has its limitations. I do think Our payroll is limited. So that's part of what I'm building right now, is figuring out where do we go. So I've done this before. It's never easy. So, but every company has a little bit different needs. For us, we have a huge service component. And so I have to take that into consideration.
And then the next question for you is, how do you make a trade-off of implementing a new solution versus hiring a new employee?
I think it's timing. It's really understanding at what point do you bring someone in. So in 3 of my past companies, I implemented NetSuite as our accounting system. And while the amount of work was a lot short term, NetSuite at Cloudflare saved us from always keeping that team lean. I think when I left there, we had under 10 people and we were again in the hundreds of millions. And I think that's the way to do it, is really understand where the value is and at what point. And it comes down to process, people, and the need. I mean, for me, really the need was my external validation, and process and people was my internal validation.
Okay, and then follow-up question on that, again for Amy. I've got a few for you too, Mike, but what tools have you used in the past that you found to be most valuable, Amy?
That's a good one. So accounting-wise, NetSuite is always my winner. I think implementing it is a nightmare. And then I've been fortunate where I've been on very tech-based companies. So internal reporting, we've been with engineers that have built it right. And then actually BI teams, like Tableau has worked really well. It all depends on what aspects. For budgeting and finance, I'll be totally honest, I've been stuck with Excel. I hate Google Sheets, but Excel has been my winner. I wish there was a better system often.
Makes sense. Okay, Mike, a hiring question. What characteristics do you look for in your first few finance hires?
That's a really good question. I think it really depends on what kind of size and scale you're at and what type of business you're looking for. But if we're talking specifically for strategic finance, I think ideally I would be looking for somebody who has, good business intuition, first and foremost, and that can go out and collaborate with a good number of business partners. And so in the very early days, it's not going to be one person supporting one department. It's going to be one person supporting many departments, many business leaders. And then the way to drive collaboration and to really, understand the data, understand the operations, understanding the processes, is to have that kind of intuition and be able, and just be like a student of business, and be able to quickly kind of collaborate and drive insights and build the models and understand the levers and just earn that seat at the table and trust with your business partner. And I mean, just table stakes to that is somebody who's good with systems, somebody who understands data, somebody who can build models. And I think all that's table stakes. Trust is critical in the role. And so having to, somebody who's going to put numbers out in front of you and in front of your business partners that you can trust is also key. So I typically like to screen for that by doing 2 exercises. One would be like a data analysis. Here's a dump of data. Give me an analysis. How do they think about, dissecting that information? And then another one is just like, okay, build me a model and let me see how they think about structure and organization and inputs. That would kind of give me a good sense of what of how they'll operate. Anything you'd add, Amy?
Yeah, I mean, as you were saying, it is their ability to storytell. So if you think about it, finance, and especially early on, they are working with all the different departments. Telling the story to an engineer is different than telling it to a marketing team. And so being able to not only take the data, but to regurgitate it in different variations so people really understand it. And then taking all the input of what they say back and building out models that can be used across, right? And I just think about this as we did this, budget to actual variance report, like the different asks. So how do we build it so we don't have to customize it for every single team? But yeah.
I couldn't agree more with that.
Okay, last question before we wrap up for the day. Well, it'll be for both of you, but we'll start with Mike. In terms of collaboration, do you see silos developing within the finance team itself, and what do you do about it?
I think absolutely. I think you constantly see it, and I think people have different jobs to be done, and I think they focus on those jobs to be done. And so early on, it's of course between accounting and FP&A, and there tends to be more of a handoff of data and information rather than an ongoing collaboration. And of course, for things like accruals and so many aspects of it requires collaborations, not just between those two teams, but also the business partner. And so sometimes it's nice to have, in those monthly meetings, FP&A is going to meet with their business partners, but, let's have accounting in the room sometimes. And a lot of times they'll be able to serve up some answers that might not be readily available to FP&A, given the level of fidelity and depth of data that they have in their models. You might need to go scrub around in the ERP. Ideally, Trace is trying to solve all those problems with better insights and serving up those insights, but that's a constant problem. And the other one that we see and hear about time and time again is just procurement and FP&A and them not being on the same page, and procurement has the best insights into what's being spent and the contract details and the billing terms, and FP&A is often modeling at a more aggregate level. And so there's constantly kind of like a divide there, but synergy between those two functions, it'll help procurement drive better savings. It'll help automate FP&A. It'll help drive accuracy. And so that's also something that, with Trace, we're hyper-focused on solving.
I actually love the idea of having the finance and accounting teams together when they meet the other departments. I actually think that is one of the biggest challenges. I don't think other departments understand that there is a difference. And so having them both sit there might really help. And then the departments can understand accounting is the past and finance is the future. So Let us help you together. But to add to that is having those teams sit with the other departments. 1 week a month, pick a department, sit with them, start the conversation, and maybe even have the buddy system between the accounting and finance team. I think I may actually implement that. I love it. Because I think that handoff is clunky, and finance people don't understand accounting and the accruals, and they don't understand that there's actual things. And it's not just procurement, then there's IT, right? IT is like, well, we already have this system, but this other person did that. So I think having those two teams go into meetings together might actually really work. I'll let you know.
Nice. Follow up.
Well, thanks, you guys. This has been a great conversation. That's all we have time for today. Thank you to everyone that joined us today. We will follow up with the slides and recording by email. But have a great day, and goodbye for now, everyone.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.